Cross-sectional studies are really kind of interesting. If we're doing a study, we usually use a certain group. So if I were doing a study in here, of course, it would be, you guys are, your average age in here is probably in the low 20s, I would guess. Has anybody graduated from high school within the last 4 years? Nobody? One. I got one. Okay. You're the only traditional student in the room. The rest of the students are non-traditional. But that's not normal. And usually in a psychology class, if we were at Harvard, everyone would be 18 or 19 or 20 years old. If we were at ASU and I had an auditorium full of students, they would probably be traditional students. Traditional students, of course, are the ones who just graduated from high school, so now they're going to college, and they'll be going to college for the next 4 or 5 years. Those are the traditional students. And we only have one traditional student in the room. You graduated from high school when?
15.
15? Okay. No, 4 years ago. There you go. Okay. Traditional student. But if I were trying to make a statement about a lot of different individuals, like the youth risk behavior surveillance, these individuals were looking at not just one grade level, they were looking at all 4 grade levels. They were looking at freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors. That's what that study is all about. It was a cross-sectional study. It was looking at four different groups of adolescents, trying to see the difference between freshmen and seniors. If you remember back, maybe Ken is the only one that can remember this far back, but if you remember back when you were freshmen in high school, you know that you were very much different than you were when you were senior. You felt like an adult when you were a senior. You thought you were an adult when you were a freshman. And then when you were a senior, you realized that you really weren't when you were a freshman in high school. You hadn't even started growing to be your adult proportions yet. So cross-sectional studies look at different groups, different cohort groups. And I did a cross-sectional study. My study was of individuals between the age of 18 and 85, as it turned out. I had an 85-year-old that took my survey. But it was a cross-sectional study. Now there is a difference. If you think about when you were a senior in high school, if you go back to your high school now and look at the seniors, you know that they're not the same as you were when you were a senior. For one thing, they listen to different music, and they dress differently than you did. Maybe they talk differently than you did. Maybe they got new words that you don't understand. And I have no idea what's going on in the cool world at this point. But I don't know what people are looking at, or are they listening to hip hop or rap or whatever. I don't know. Is there a new music out there that I've never even heard of before? Some people tell me that they listen to K-pop or J-pop. Oh, I gotta laugh. Okay, there we go. You're a K-popper? J-popper? Just wondering. Okay. I don't know what they're reading, or of course nobody's reading. What am I talking about? Nobody reads anymore. Not like people used to read in the old days. Okay. Anyway, so we're looking at a cross-sectional study looks at all these individuals and to see how people change over time. Actually, they don't look to see how they change over time. What they're looking at is different cohort groups at the same time. So how I'm almost 70 years old. How am I different than Francis? Why are my ideas different than Francis's? Of course, when Francis is 70 years old, then the ideas that I have aren't going to be his ideas, because I have lived through different historical events. So my interpretations may be different. So a cross-sectional study looks at people of different ages at the same time. Results from this type of research can be considered circumspect because it assumes that differences will remain constant over time, and of course they don't. So there's a lot of research that's being done in psychology that's fairly bogus. I hate to say this, don't repeat this to either Sarah or to Sue. They will have my head on a platter. But the reality is a lot of research isn't any good. People are doing it because they have to do it. People are doing it because that's the only way they can keep their job. People are doing it so that they can brag about doing this research and then maybe they can get a better job. So there is research out there that's crap. Doesn't mean jack squat. If you do research in New York City, what does that have to do with the Navajo reservation? Anything? What if they're Navajos that you're doing research on? In New York City. Who live in New York City? Does that have anything to do with the Navajo reservation? Is it accurate? All this research coming out of Los Angeles. The research that Sarah did in San Diego, does that have anything to do with Clinton, Iowa, or Grand Rapids, or Billings, Montana? Does it? You can say no. It'll hurt her feelings, but don't tell her, okay? Just don't tell her. So where you do the research is really important. Who the person was that did the research is very important. If it's somebody from Michigan, at the University of Michigan, probably they didn't travel 500 miles to do their research. If they're at the University of Michigan, it was probably done right there in Ann Arbor. It was probably done on their students, their psych students. Well, what do we know about the psych students at the University of Michigan? Well, nothing really, except University of Michigan is an upper tier school. Sarah went to Northwestern. It's an upper tier school. Top tier school. What about New Mexico Highlands? Is that a top tier school?
There's one research that's like spread all over. I think it's like the Stanford experiment.
Right, the Stanford experiment was an experiment dealing with geniuses. But this started in 1970. Most of those people are dead. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it was on students, and later it just like blew up into like.
They started looking at geniuses all over the United States. As interesting as that is. Are geniuses more resilient than people that aren't geniuses? The answer is a little bit, not a whole lot, but they are to some extent. They can usually think themselves out of a problem, so they are a little bit more resilient. So the people that I graduated from high school with, the people that I graduated from college with, the people that I was in the military with, that's my cohort group. And they were mostly about the same age. They were my age. We had the same ideas. But I graduated from high school in 1967. I graduated from college in 1971. I was in the military from 1971 until 1983. So my cohort group are really old people. And I keep talking about my friend in West Virginia who died last year. I served with him in Nebraska. We were in the military together. He was 2 years younger than I was. He was in my cohort group. He's dead. So anything I tell you about him has already fallen off the edge of the map because he's gone. So age is important. Socioeconomic status is important. We're looking at people who are of the same socioeconomic status. And we're looking at people who went through the same historical events. I talk to people who were in the Iraq and in Afghanistan all the time. I was never in Iraq and Afghanistan. My war was Vietnam. What's the difference between Afghanistan and Vietnam? Well, it's really hot as hell in Vietnam. It's a rainforest. Vietnam's a rainforest. Afghanistan is a desert. It's a high desert, but it's still a desert. Iraq's even more of a desert, but it's a low desert. And it's hot. It gets up to 120 degrees. It got over 100 degrees in Vietnam, but the humidity was like 98%. It's like zero in the desert. So historical events are very important. My dad was a veteran of World War II. He had a different mindset. My dad hated the Japanese. Well, he was in the European theater. He didn't even fight against the Japanese. But he hated them. He wouldn't buy a Japanese car. He wouldn't buy a Japanese television. He wouldn't buy a Japanese camera. He wouldn't buy a Japanese anything. He hated the Japanese. And in turn, he hated all Asians as far as that goes, because he thought they started World War II. Longitudinal study is a study that is in which a single group of people is observed over a long span of time. There's a famous longitudinal study in Hawaii, the Kauai Longitudinal Study. It was started in 1955. A lady by the name of Emmy Werner and Roberta Smith. I think her name's Roberta. Anyway, Smith was a social worker, and then she became a psychologist. The island of Kauai in 1955 was owned by the Del Monte Pineapple Company. So they had the people on the island were people that worked in the fields, because that's all there was. So the socioeconomic status was just about the same for everybody. They were fairly low socioeconomic status. If you understood anything about pineapples, they lived on the farm. The house that they lived in was owned by the company. The food that they ate was owned by the company. Almost everything that they bought from the company. So the socioeconomic status was relatively low. Now the question is, what's going to happen to these people when they grow up? These children, and of course, I mean, there were married couples and they had babies. And in 1955, they started writing down all the babies that were born. And they started following them, and they are still following them to this day. And you can read about this study. They have published 3 books dealing with resiliency of this group of individuals of a relatively low socioeconomic status. Well, Del Monte doesn't own the island anymore. It used to, but it doesn't anymore. So most of those jobs went away. And some of the people stayed on the island, just like some people stay, despite the fact that the uranium mines have closed, there are still people living here on the reservation. What do? What do? They used to be miners, they ain't anymore. They're not miners anymore. What do? What is there to do on the reservation? Ranching? Okay, that's something to do. Raise sheep. Or maybe cattle. Okay. Horses. Wait a minute. Yeah, but you can't do it. What are you going to do with a horse? Ride it. Yeah, okay. Can you sell it? Can you survive with a horse? So what did they do in Kauai? Well, some of them just stuck around and they went into the tourist trade. That happened. But a lot of people had to leave. So guess who were the most successful people that left? What happened to these people? The education wasn't very good on the island. So you're not talking about individuals that are now running for president of the United States. And, the one thing that seemed to be the most resilient for these individuals were individuals that joined the military. Hawaii has a lot to do with the military. They've got Army posts, they've got an Air Force base there. They have several naval bases there. Lots and lots of military on the island, especially Army. Marines are there. I have a friend from up north who joined the Marines, and he's been on Hawaii for 14 years. And they want him to come back because they want him to run for tribal president, but he doesn't want to come back. He's been on the island for 14 years. Anyway, that's a longitudinal study. Now, the beauty of a longitudinal study is you can look at people and how they change over time. And this is the same group of individuals. If you look at a cross-sectional study and you look at people of different ages, you're also looking at different personalities. But a longitudinal study controls for that. You're looking at the same personality over time. And if you read those studies, the Kauai longitudinal study, and like I said, they published 3 books about this. The last one came out 5 years ago, I think. I used it in my own research. I actually used their trauma survey. They had a trauma survey that Emmy Werner developed. And I wrote her a letter. She's at the University of California, Davis. I wrote her a letter about University of California, Davis. Why do we know the University of California, Davis? That's where Christine got her PhD. Christine Aubin. Anyway, not important at all. I wrote her a letter and she said, sure, go ahead and use it. Nobody wants to use my trauma survey, but go ahead and use it. I said, great, thank you very much. And I did. I used it in my own research. The problem with the longitudinal study is time consuming. The other problem with a longitudinal study is people drop out because they die. And these people are getting pretty old. I mean, if you're born in 1955, that makes you what? 45 plus 19, 63, 64? Yeah, so these people are getting kind of long in the tooth. But of course, the longitudinal study started in 1955, but they kept signing people up until 1960. But still, they're in their 50s. And some people don't make it 60 or 70 years. They die. And the other problem is it's expensive. It tends to be expensive. Emmy Werner made her career on the Kauai longitudinal study. That's all she's done for the last 50 years. It gets boring after a while. You're looking at the same people. What they do is they send surveys to these people. Some people just disappear. They go into the military, they go to Afghanistan, and then they disappear. Did they die? Well, maybe not. Maybe they just don't want to communicate anymore. It's voluntary. It has to be voluntary. So the people have to keep wanting to do it in order for the longitudinal study to work. With the Kauai longitudinal study, look it up. It's really fascinating. And they were looking at resilience to find out how resilient this population is. Most of them were indigenous, relatively indigenous. I know. You guys are all Navajo, okay? Okay, you're all Navajo. But on Hawaii, they kept bringing in different groups. Chinese came, Japanese came, the Portuguese came, who else was there? The Puerto Ricans, they brought Puerto Ricans to the island. And the Hawaiians didn't produce a lot of children. That was a problem. But they did produce children if they married somebody else. There seems to have been maybe a problem with a genetic problem. So a lot of these individuals aren't pure Hawaiians. Very few of them are actually. A lot of them are Portuguese, or part Portuguese, part Chinese, part Japanese. Anyway, the basic question in developmental psychology is, which is more important, nature or nurture? Is it genes that create the individual or the environment? And of course, I can ask this question all day long. The biological, psychological individuals, the ones studying biological psychology, want it to be genes because they want to be able to say something. They can look at your genes and they can tell you who you are. That's kind of 23andMe. That's what they want to tell you. Okay, this is what your genes say, so this is the way everything's going to turn out. That would be nice. But the reality is the environment changes things. And we know that it changes things because of epigenetics and methylation and all the rest. Sometimes one gene will be expressed because you got beat up when you were 7 years old, and now you're afraid of bullies, and that gene kicked in, and now you're a little bit paranoid about things. How did this happen? Your genes don't say you should be paranoid. Well, that gene was triggered when you got beat up at 7 years old, and now you're paranoid about things. So sometimes that's the way the world works. If you were born with a silver spoon in your mouth, never had to worry about anything, nobody ever said anything mean to you. What if nobody ever argued with you because you had money? You could fire them. Would you grow up differently than somebody who never gets to make a decision? And every time you make a decision, somebody tells you how stupid you are? Oh boy, I would think so, yeah. Okay. Oh man, some people don't like to be told no. Me, I've been told no a lot in my life, so it doesn't bother me a bit. I had an argument yesterday with somebody over the internet, or not over the internet, but in my emails. They were trying to tell me no, and I said, okay. Aren't you trying to argue about this? Like, no, hell no. Why would I argue? I don't want to get in a fight. Is it that important? It is to me. Well, okay. So you want me to argue with you? Okay. In order to answer this question, researchers will look at traits and they'll try to determine whether heritability is more important or whether it is the impact or the environment. I told you about the Japanese study that they did, the Japanese before World War II. They were trying to figure out how they could take all those soldiers from northern Japan and make them into soldiers that could fight in the jungles and the rainforests of the Pacific Rim. And what they discovered was how you grow up, where you grow up, changes the sweat glands that you have. So you guys are from here. And if you go, especially if you go down into the valley, Sue wrote me an email bragging about the fact that it was 70 degrees in the valley. And
Sorry.
yeah, I know. And she said, oh, it's 70 degrees down here. And of course, I'm up here and it's like, 10 or whatever it was over the weekend. And I don't care because I like cold weather. I like cold weather. And she's bragging about how warm it is down there. So if you're raised in a cold environment, you have fewer sweat glands. Well, actually you have more sweat glands. As it works, if you get into where it's hot, then you sweat a lot because you're not used to that type of heat. So your water just pours off of you. So if you're born in a cold environment, you sweat too much when you're in the heat. If you're raised in a hot environment, then you don't put out as much liquid. That makes sense. You don't sweat as much. And this is what the Japanese discovered. They couldn't send those guys born on Hokkaido, that island in northern Japan. If they were born in Hokkaido, then they couldn't send them to tropical areas. If I tried to survive in Phoenix, or Tempe or whatever, in the summertime, I'd probably expire because I'd sweat like a pig. I'd sweat a lot. Pigs don't really sweat that much. I'd sweat like a human. Yeah. But I'm not used to this hot environment. I'm used to Iowa, where there's a lot of humidity. And because Iowa has a lot of humidity, I'm used to a humid environment. I was born and raised in that kind of an environment. Heritability is the amount of variation in a trait among a group of individuals that can be attributed to genes. So why am I only 5'7"? Why? How come I'm only 5'7"? I have a brother that's 5'10". What's going on here? Why is he 5'10"? Why am I not 5'10"? And he's considered a lot more attractive than I am. Why the hell is he pretty and I'm not? What's going on here? I'm too short to be pretty. I have a picture of all my brothers and my dad in my office. And here's, my brother, me, and then my brother. Okay, there we go. There's four of us. I have two tall brothers and then there's the two short ugly guys in the middle. And I'm one of those short, ugly guys. I know, it's tragic. Why did I have to look like this? Why couldn't I be pretty like my younger brother, my baby brother, who's tall and women just go crazy over it. Oh, did you see David? Oh, he's so pretty. He's also a pain in the ass. And maybe I'm a pain in the ass. To this end, researchers will use two techniques to measure differences. So we're looking at heritability, and they do this with twin studies and adoption studies. With twin studies, they're looking at, they compare identical twins to fraternal twins to see which traits are the most likely to be genetic. Identical twins have identical genes. That's the way it works. If an identical twin murders somebody and their genes are distributed throughout the crime scene, then possibly they'll arrest the wrong twin. It happens. It has been known to happen because their genes look almost identical. Not quite, but they're almost identical. Researchers have found that when one identical twin has Alzheimer's disease, the second twin has a 60 to 75% chance to have it as well. Ashton Kutcher is a twin. He has a twin. His twin brother doesn't look anything like him. He's a fraternal twin. His fraternal twin is shorter than he is by about 6 inches. He also has MS, I think. Yeah, he has MS. He also wears glasses, really thick glasses. So they're not the same. Obviously, they're not the same. When a fraternal twin has Alzheimer's disease, the probability of the second twin having it is only 30 to 45%. I was talking to Sue yesterday, and she was talking about Alzheimer's disease. They've discovered there's a connection between Alzheimer's disease and gingivitis, gum disease. As strange as that is. Somehow, if you have gingivitis, it stays in your gums, and all that bacteria potentially crosses the blood-brain barrier, and it affects your brain. Creates tau proteins, and you get neurofibrillary tangles from the gingivitis, as strange as that is. Which is a little bit worrisome to me because I have an older sister who had gingivitis as a child, and she's been fighting it all of her life. So potentially she may come down with Alzheimer's disease. One of the ways that you can combat Alzheimer's disease is to stay intellectually stimulated. That means not watch television. Television is passive. You don't have to think. All you do is watch and accept. Do crossword puzzles, do sudokus, whatever that number game is. Play mental games. Prepare lectures for college professors. My sister's not a college professor. As a matter of fact, she's never done anything intellectual. So I'm kind of scared that she may come down with Alzheimer's disease. Anyway, we'll see what happens, since she's had gingivitis. Adoption studies. In adoption studies, researchers are looking at how two disparate environments affect the outcomes of identical twins. If you watch CNN, they have there's a television show about triplets, identical triplets, who were separated at birth. I haven't seen it. They keep telling me that it's fascinating. But I'm not exactly sure what's going on as far as the three are concerned. They all ended up at the same institution, at the same college. And that's how they discovered each other. People kept calling them by the wrong name. They were identical triplets. And they really did look alike. One of them didn't end up at the college somehow. Epidemiological research tracking diseases. We do this through the MMWR, the Morbidity and Mortality weekly report. This comes out every week. This is how we keep track of what diseases are out there, what's killing people, whether it's alcohol or whether we have more cases of syphilis than we had last week, or more cases of measles. The measles epidemic is making the national news. It's seems that there are people that aren't getting their children inoculated. And their rationale is that it causes autism. But as we know, if we look at these things, the research that said that there was a connection between inoculation and autism was flawed research. It was flawed. But unfortunately, there are a lot of people that believe it. One of them is Jenny McCarthy. Who's Jenny McCarthy? Well, she used to live with Jim Carrey. She was also a Playboy Bunny of the Year. I don't know what they call those people. Anyway, I haven't looked at a Playboy in a long time. Chris knows. What do they call those?
Oh, yeah.
Bunny of the Year. What do they call those? Playmate of the Year. That's what it was. Playmate of the Year. That's what they call it.
Playmate something.
I'm sorry?
Playmates.
Playmate of the Year. She was the Playmate of the Year. Jenny McCarthy. Okay. Anyway, she has a son that is autistic. She also, and she was one of the first people to come out and say that his autism was caused by the inoculation. That's what she was one of the first people that said that. But there's a lot of people that say that. And then they had this research that said there may be a connection between the two. But then they discovered that there was a flaw in the research. So some people decided that they wouldn't get their children inoculated. Now the reality is you can get inoculations for free. The county health department will give you your shots. Of course, it makes your baby cry, and nobody likes for their baby to cry. But as it turns out, there's a county, Washington State and Oregon State, both allow you to decide whether you are going to inoculate your children. And there's a county in Washington, Clark County, where 8% of the people in that county didn't inoculate their children. And now they've got a measles outbreak there. As stupid as that sounds. Measles kills babies, can kill babies. Doesn't happen every time. Doesn't happen most of the time. But it can kill babies. We're going to talk about the flu and how many babies have died from the flu this season. I know. This is kind of scary. The two groups, you have to remember that infants' immune system does not mature until they're 2 to 3 years old. So until they're 2 to 3, they can't fight off diseases like adults can or adolescents can. I mean, little kids catch colds all the time. Babies die of these things if it's the flu, potentially. Old people die of this because they're immunocompromised. So it's the very old and the very young that we're dealing with here. Anyway, when I was young, they didn't have a measles shot, so I came down with the measles. Like I said last time, I came down with it 3 times, and I still have the scarring on the palms of my hands. That's what those red splotches on the palms of my hands are all about. That happened when I had the measles. Freaky, isn't it? My wife doesn't have red splotches on the palms of her hands because she never had the measles. But I do. I have red splotches. I have 2 brothers that never caught the measles. But I have another brother that did catch the measles. Anyway, okay. So every week they come out with the MMWR, the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. Morbidity means disease. How much disease is out there? What kinds of diseases are out there? This becomes really, really important if you're talking about the measles. We had eradicated the measles. In 2001, there were 0 cases of measles in the United States. Now we have an outbreak in Clark County of Washington because those mothers didn't inoculate their children. Hopefully none of those babies die. None of those children die. They had a measles outbreak in California. Some of those babies did die, unfortunately. This is not a happy story. Sorry about that. We need to know this stuff. We need to know where there are outbreaks. Maybe there's an outbreak of gonorrhea in Apache County, Arizona. We need to know that. If it's just here, then what do we have to do? We have to find the people that are spreading the gonorrhea. It's only here. It's not in Pima County. Is there a Pima County in this? I think there is. Navajo County south of here. This is Apache. I don't know why it's Apache. I haven't figured it out. Maybe the people in Phoenix decided, oh, let's pick on those Navajos. Let's name their reservations Apache County, just to tweak their noses, since there are no Apaches there. Just call it Apache County. I don't know. Anyway, so this is what they're looking for. They're trying to figure out where there are outbreaks. Is there an outbreak of HIV in the area? How much HIV is there? Is there an outbreak of whooping cough? There have been outbreaks of whooping cough all across the country. This happened about 3 years ago, and it hasn't stopped yet. So there are select counties where there are outbreaks of whooping cough. Well, you don't want your kid catching whooping cough. It can kill them. Another student was saying that his son was in the hospital for a month with a whooping cough, but of course he survived. Everything's fine. But this is stuff you have to think about. Morbidity is the number of cases of a specific illness, injury, or disability in a given group of people at a given time. Usually they do it by county. Then they do it by state, and then they do it by region, and then they do it by nation. Mortality means death. Mortality is the number of deaths due to a specific cause in a given group at a given time. Once upon a time, HIV was killing people. We didn't know how to treat it. It's still killing people. So we need to know how many people have HIV and how many people have died from HIV in the last month, in the last week. We need to know this information so that we know where there are outbreaks, so that we can concentrate our inoculations, we can concentrate our control. Etiology means the origin. The etiology is the causes or the origins of a specific disease. So let's say we have, and I hate to pick on it, let's pick on Navajo County instead of Apache County. Let's say we have an outbreak of gonorrhea in Navajo County. Let's say we have that. Okay. We need to know what the etiology is. Where is it coming from? Who's got it? Are these females or are these males? Are these males going down to Phoenix and picking it up from people in Phoenix or Tempe or whatever? I don't know. Where are the prostitutes in Maricopa County? Does anybody know? We need to know if there are prostitutes. We need to know if how this happened. Let me tell you a quick story, and this is about gonorrhea. When I was in the military, one of my jobs was to diagnose gonorrhea. I was a lab tech. And lab techs are the ones that get the specimen. Okay, and then they look at the specimen to determine if it's gonorrhea. So I was working in microbiology, and I was the one that was doing the gonorrhea slides. And all of a sudden I started, and usually it's just something else. It's not gonorrhea. Don't worry about it. It's no big deal. All of a sudden I got a case of gonorrhea. So I took it down to public health. I said, I've got a case of gonorrhea. He said, okay. Okay. You know how public health people are. They're kind of stupid. So about 2 days later, I got another case. This is kind of exciting. So I got another case, and I looked at it, and they were from the same. They were the same. They worked the same jobs. They were both cops. As it turned out, they were both cops. They were both male. Okay, no problems yet. Okay, so about 4 or 5 days later, I got another cop that came in with gonorrhea. Took it down to public health. I said, maybe we got a problem here. He said, oh, don't worry about it. We see this all the time. You know, there's German prostitutes out there. Prostitution's legal in Germany. You know, these guys are just messing around. Don't worry about it. It's no big deal. Wait a minute. This guy's a cop, and this guy's a cop, and this guy's a cop. Don't you think there's potentially a problem? No. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. So about the same time, we started. Females are really hard to diagnose gonorrhea. You know, you can't do a slide to look for gonorrhea bacteria. All you can do is culture them. So in microbiology, of course, I was culturing this stuff, and we started seeing positive females coming in with gonorrhea. And it turned out they were the wives of these cops, but nobody was putting the two and two together, because even though I was taking it to public health wasn't putting the microbiology results in with the slide results. They weren't putting them together. And of course, I'm seeing all these people coming in. And all of a sudden, I've got like 8 people with gonorrhea, and they're all cops or cops' wives. And so I went to public health and I said, look, we've got 8 cases of gonorrhea. And they said, oh yeah, I didn't even notice that. Yeah, we have these 4 people. Yeah, we have these 4 people over here. We have these 4 people over here. And I said, well, did you ask them where they got the gonorrhea? And of course, that's one of the things that they have to do. But they were interviewing them all separately. And because of that, they weren't putting anything together. Nothing was going together. So eventually what happened was, finally after me harassing them, they went to the first sergeant of the cop squadron, and when they started asking him questions. Well, it turned out he had gonorrhea, and he had been treated off base because he didn't want the military to know that he had picked it up. So they started questioning everybody. It turned out that there was like, a dozen people with gonorrhea, but most of them had been treated off base because they didn't want it to go into their medical records. Anyway, so we've got 12 people with gonorrhea. What's going to happen? What's happening here? Well, as it turned out, there was a female cop, and she was very friendly, and she was having sex with all these guys, and she had picked up gonorrhea. Well, it's asymptomatic in females. She had no clue that she had gonorrhea, but some of the cops' wives, of course, had contracted gonorrhea at the same time. Anyway, but we had to put all this stuff together. And there was nobody, everybody was trying to pretend that there wasn't a problem. That's the easiest way to do things, is pretend there's no problem. And I caused all this trouble, because I was the one that harassed the public health to go and look at this stuff. So this is the ugly part of the story. Guess who lost their jobs? Well, I didn't lose my job. I didn't lose my job, but they took the lady with gonorrhea and they shipped her out over to Korea, and they took half of these cops and they shipped them all over the world. So everybody's pissed. The cops are really pissed off at me. So I have to drive like the speed limit on base because everybody's looking for me. I'm the one that had caused all these problems. Not only that, but one of them was the highest scoring basketball player on base, and one of them was a really good softball player. And so they were trying to win the Commander's Trophy for having the best sports I know. Oh my God. I caused all that chaos just because I was trying to keep people, and they didn't care. That's one of the reasons why they went off base. They didn't want anybody to notice. And I caused all that trouble. But we got rid of the gonorrhea. As soon as that lady left, we didn't have any more cases of gonorrhea. But of course the wives were pissed. Well, of course the wives were pissed. All right. Incidence rate. Incidence is the number of new cases of a disease or condition that occur in a specific population within a defined time interval. And of course, this was the biggest problem that they had. Once we found out these guys were going off base to be treated, then we found out that the incidence rate was really, really high. And of course, the probability that they were visiting prostitutes that had been infected by gonorrhea, it happens. And it'll happen once or twice a week. We'll get somebody coming in with gonorrhea. And there's not a whole lot you can do about it because, this is somebody off base. There was nothing we could do. Nobody was putting any of this stuff together. But once we found out that the incidence rate was so high, we put the people that were being treated off base with the people being treated on base. It changed everything. The incidence rate all of a sudden skyrocketed. And because of that, we realized that the problem was on base, not off base. Prevalence is the total number of diagnosed cases of a disease or condition that exists at a given time. And of course, for us to get this information, we needed to know how many cases were off base. Now the reality is that the Germans they don't have an MMWR. Germans don't do that. They don't play that game. Germans pretend that everything's fine. Of course, we didn't. We wanted to know how many of our cops had gonorrhea, and we needed to get rid of it. But of course, the prevalence rate, we needed that information from off base in order to know what was going on. The first epidemiology study was in 1830, 1848, and 1854. Now, I want you to notice how slowly the medical community responds to problems. When we first discovered HIV, when we saw our first cases of HIV, it took the medical community forever to respond to it. We still had people denying that HIV existed in 1985. It took people, famous people dying before they even admitted that this was a problem. As long as it stayed in the gay male community, nobody cared. Well, some people, gay males cared, of course. And then they made a movie called Philadelphia with Tom Hanks, and he was the one, and Antonio Banderas was his boyfriend. You know, as exciting as all that is. Anyway, they made a movie. And after they made the movie, then people started paying attention. All these individuals were dying, but nobody knew any of these people, so nobody cared. Do you guys care about the polar vortex? It's not bothering you. It's minus 50 degrees in Chicago. My daughter's high school is closed because they can't warm the rooms warm enough. They've got the furnace going at full blast, but there's enough cracks in the wall, not cracks in the walls, there's enough air coming in from the outside, which is super cool there. I mean, minus 50, you can't go outside at all. That's really, really cold. This is Chicago. My daughter doesn't live in Chicago. We live in Clinton. She lives in Clinton, Iowa. But it's so cold that they can't open the school. Do you guys care? A little boy got mad at his parents because his parents, 13-year-old boy, got mad at his parents, this is in Marshalltown, got mad at his parents because his parents said he was using too much internet on his telephone and it was costing him too much money, and he got mad and went outside and froze to death. And they started looking for him. They estimated that he froze to death in about an hour and a half. And of course, you know how petulant children are. He's hiding someplace, and he thinks he's okay. Well, if you know anything about freezing to death, you go to sleep. Everything slows down and you just go to sleep. It's really an easy way to go if you think about it. Bad ways to go, drowning and fire and whatever. But he froze to death in about an hour and a half. They found him about 5 hours later. So do you guys care? Is it important? You care about people in Chicago? You do? I do because it's my family, but
I think of the homeless.
don't worry about the homeless. They got that taken care of. Okay. Yeah. Chicago takes care of all that stuff. They're really good about it. Really bad place to be homeless is Chicago in the winter time. Most of those guys travel south to Phoenix to be where it's a little bit warmer, and they have a greater probability of surviving. So the medical community doesn't respond to this stuff very well, unless it's a really serious outbreak. Ebola virus, for example. We had an outbreak of some kind of flu a couple years ago. Oh, Zika virus. The Zika virus. Yeah, Zika virus, if that mosquito bit you guys, you wouldn't have to worry about it. You're all adults. But if you were pregnant and you got bit by the Zika virus, then your baby would... It would affect the, microcephaly. It caused microcephaly, exactly. So this was a real serious problem. They had an outbreak of it in Brazil. And then they had the Olympics in Rio de Janeiro, and they were afraid that people would come back to the States with the Zika virus. But of course, nothing happened. There were states where they had outbreaks. Arizona was not one of those states. And the reason you didn't have to worry about it here because The Zika virus, the Egyptus mosquito, can't live at this altitude. You guys are at 7,500 feet, so you're okay. Okay, so anyway, so they couldn't figure out why they had this cholera outbreak. They had an outbreak in 1830, 1848, and 1854. John Snow was a physician who was trying to determine why cholera outbreaks occurred and why they spread in such constant patterns. They couldn't figure it out. Snow was able to map the progress of the outbreak and noticed that the disease seemed to be isolated to individual families and might be different from one side of the street to the other side of the street. He determined that it was waterborne, and he traced it back to a contaminated water pump in Soho. And this is what he saw. He saw the contamination starting and ending in one place. There was one central area that always had a cholera outbreak. There was a single pump that was contaminated with fecal material. So people were drinking water that had fecal bacteria. It tells you need to make sure your water's clean. Okay. Anyway, that's where cholera comes from. And where was that pump? Wait a minute. It was right here. Yeah, it's right here. That's where the pump was. Well, a full 25% of people in the United States have hypertension. 42.5% of the people of African ancestry suffer from the problem, which leads to heart disease, stroke, and kidney disease. This is a really serious problem among African Americans. You guys don't have to worry about it, but they do. High blood pressure. So they need to have their blood pressure taken from the time they reach adulthood until they reach old age, if they make it that far. This is a really serious problem. 20% of the deaths in the black community can be attributed to hypertension, while the same problem in the white community only accounts for about 10% of the deaths. So how important is hypertension? Well, for 10% of the white community, it's really important. For 20% of the black community, it's really important. So what's the probability of a black person having hypertension? Not that we know the statistics. Is it more important to check your blood pressure if you're black than if you're white? It's twice as important. Twice as many black people die from hypertensive causes than white people. The problem is, who's got all the money? Black people have all the money. No, that's not right. White people have all the money. The President Trump is what race? He's white.
Oh, those are trick questions. Black.
How many African Americans are in his administration? None. None. So how important is hypertension to the Trump administration? Well, I don't know. It's really hard to say. Is he going to respond to it? Ronald Reagan was president when the HIV epidemic started. And since his ox wasn't gored, he didn't have any gay male relatives. He didn't care. And the evangelical Christians were saying, this is a punishment, God's punishment for being gay. That's what they said. It was really kind of interesting. Working in medicine at the time was really kind of strange, because you had all these evangelicals that were screaming that this is God's punishment for being gay. This is why you're dying, and being in medicine, of course, I'm thinking, oh my God, what's one thing got to do with the other? It was really a tough time. They were marching on hospitals, especially hospitals with anybody that was gay in it. I was in Omaha, Nebraska. We didn't have an HIV outbreak in Omaha, Nebraska. But they had an HIV outbreak in New York City and New Jersey. So guess what happened next? We had all these empty beds, so guess what happened? They started shipping people with HIV to Omaha to house them. And we accepted them because they came. But of course. So we had to deal with this problem, and we had evangelicals marching in the street. Don't let these people in. you can't let these people in, they'll contaminate us. Of course, they had no clue where it came from. They just thought it was a gay disease, only gay people could get it. Epidemiologists have sought to discover why the problem is so prevalent in black communities. Evolutionary psychology has tapped mate selection as a possible culprit. It was purported that traveling in slave ships may have selected individuals who retained salt. Those that lost salt readily would not have survived on the long voyage because they didn't give them very much water. And some of the water that they gave them was contaminated. So the individuals that survived the voyage were the ones that retained salt. And because they retained salt, now they have hypertension today. It is a genetic situation. They retain salt, they have hypertension. And there was a larger population of African Americans, of Africans, who survived and started reproducing back in the States than there are in Nigeria, than there are in Africa. Because in Africa, it really doesn't matter whether you retain salt or not as to whether you get to reproduce. But in the United States, of course, the only ones that survived, or the ones that were more likely to survive, were the ones that retained salt. And so they were the ones that were allowed to reproduce. The ones that didn't retain salt didn't live. So they dropped out of the gene pool. Does all this make sense? Okay. Okay. And that's why African Americans in the United States, well, of course they're African Americans, they're in the United States. That's why African Americans have a lot more hypertension than Africans have in Africa. Looking at individuals of African ancestry along the slave route in Nigeria, Jamaica, and the United States, the researchers discovered that only 7% of people in rural Nigeria had hypertension, while those in Jamaica suffered at a rate of 26%, and those in Chicago suffered hypertension at a rate of 33%. So why is it higher in Chicago than it is in Jamaica? Can anybody come up with a reason why people in Jamaica have a lower hypertension rate than people in Chicago? Is there a rationale there? What's wrong with Jamaica? No, that's not right. What's right with Jamaica that's wrong with Chicago? You? I'm sorry? The weather's colder in Chicago. Well, especially today. My God, it was minus 50. But that's not the reason. Food? Food? Yeah. Potentially, yeah. Potentially could be food. Yeah. They come up with a different explanation. Are you ready for the explanation? Jamaica's all black. The stress level is much lower in Jamaica than it is in Chicago. Where, has anybody been to Chicago? Where are all the African Americans in Chicago?
Central inner cities. Well, actually, they're like
South section. They're all in the south side.
I didn't go to the south
Oh,
side.
you didn't go to the south side. Of course you didn't. Why would you go to the south side? They're all African Americans down there. Okay. Yeah. Of course, the reason I have Michelle Obama is because she's from Chicago, as it turns out. And her dad died of hypertension. He also had other problems, but he died of hypertension. Anyway, this is an African from Nigeria. This is somebody from Jamaica, and then we have Michelle Obama. Anyway, it has to do with the fact that there's more stress because they live in a city with a lot of white people, and there's a lot of prejudice. And of course, the prejudice in Jamaica is minimal, since it's the majority of people in Jamaica are black, so they feel less stress in Chicago. But potentially has something to do with the food as well. Food's really expensive in Chicago. Did you notice that? Food's expensive in Chicago.
Expensive everywhere.
Did you eat a deep dish Chicago pizza?
Yes, I did.
Did you like it?
Yeah, it was good.
I don't like deep dish.
It's makeup.
It's got that much. Deep dish pizza. This is good pizza. This is the best pizza in the whole wide world. Bite into it. Tastes like all the other pizza that
I
I've
don't
ever
want to say
had.
it's the best, but
Say it was the best either. But my niece would. Of course, she's from Chicago. Risk factors began to show themselves as researchers got farther away from Nigeria. BMI rose steadily from Nigeria to Chicago. In other words, the fact that they were chubbier in Chicago than they were in either Jamaica or Nigeria. Lack of exercise and poor diet explain nearly 50% of the hypertension. The slave ship salt theory does not explain all the differences between the groups in Nigeria, Jamaica, and Chicago. And of course, this guy's from Jamaica. This guy's from Jamaica. This guy's from Jamaica. She's from Jamaica. Okay. Maybe all these. No, I don't think so. That's Tyson. Isn't that his name? The real pretty guy that is in all the music videos or something. Tyson, isn't that his last name? I can't remember. Anyway. Incidence of 235 T gene and hypertension among different ethnic groups. Theoretically, there is a gene that causes hypertension, and it's a 235T gene. And as you can see, it's more prevalent among Africans than it is among European Americans. Far more prevalent. About the same for everybody. But of course, does it manifest itself? No. In Nigeria it doesn't, but in Chicago it does because of all the other factors. A retrospective study is a backward-looking study in which a group of people who have a certain condition are compared with a group of people who are free of that condition. Retrospective studies are usually done by reviewing records. And this is how we discovered that there are select people that are immune to the HIV virus. There aren't very many, but there are people who have an immunity to the HIV virus. I may be one of those people. 1985, I ruptured my spleen. I went to surgery. They gave me 6 units of blood. At the time, they had no ability to test the blood for HIV. So potentially, I was tainted with HIV virus. Potentially. I have never developed HIV. I've never had a positive HIV test. So either I'm immune to HIV or there was no HIV in those blood samples. However, the gay community in Nebraska is in Lincoln, and all of my blood came from Lincoln. So the probability that somebody was gay who gave me, who donated blood, or donated the blood that I got, is fairly high. The gay community is relatively significant in Lincoln, Nebraska. But that doesn't mean that my blood was tainted. So either I'm immune to it or my blood wasn't tainted. I got 6 units. That's a lot of units of blood. That gives me a lot of chances to catch the HIV virus. Retrospective studies are usually done by reviewing records. Retrospective studies were important in determining the risk factors that led to the AIDS epidemic. This is how we chased it back to the bathhouses of New York. Then we chased it back from the bathhouses of New York to Haiti. Somebody had gone on a vacation. Some gay individuals had gone on a vacation to Haiti, and they had contracted the AIDS virus in Haiti. And then we were able to chase it back to Africa. It turns out that the HIV virus came from Now, what do Africans have to do with monkeys? Are they having sex with monkeys? Is that what's going on? How did that monkey virus get into humans? Africans eat what they refer to as bushmeat. Bushmeat is any meat. They'll eat just about anything that they can kill. Sometimes it's antelope, sometimes it's sloth. Well, sloths live in South America. But they'll eat any meat that they can find, and they call it bushmeat. And theoretically, Africans like to eat bushmeat because they think it makes them more virile, makes them stronger. It's meat that comes from the jungle, and the jungle gives them their strength, gives them their power. And so they eat a lot of bushmeat. Unfortunately, of course, they're denuding the the African continent of meat, of mammals, because they're eating so much bushmeat. Researchers first saw a marked increase in the number of rare forms of cancer called Kaposi's sarcoma and pneumocystis pneumonia in gay male and intravenous drug-using populations. Initially, it was just in the gay male population. They saw all these guys coming down with this type of cancer and pneumocystis pneumonia. We only saw pneumocystis pneumonia and Kaposi's sarcoma in individuals who were immunocompromised. We didn't see it in any other populations. All of a sudden, we're seeing it all over the place. All of a sudden, we can't figure out why. This doesn't make any sense. None of these people have leukemia. None of these people have lymphoma. Why in the world are they coming down with this disease which only affects people that are immunocompromised? So from there, we determined that they must be immunocompromised. Why are they immunocompromised? Well, as it turns out, the HIV virus infects the white cell that identifies the antigen. And it destroys it. Well, it actually puts its own DNA in there and makes it non-functional. So they didn't have a cell that was wandering through the body telling it that this is an alien structure. And so all of these diseases that we never saw, that we only saw in immunocompromised individuals, all of a sudden became prevalent in the gay community, in that group. Yes, sir.
Is one of those related to the AIDS-related cancer? Because I heard there's AIDS-related cancer, or cancer related to AIDS.
Something new. That's something relatively new. Kaposi's sarcoma is the cancer that we saw from the beginning. But now we're seeing a new type of cancer that we've never seen before. And I'm assuming that's what you're talking about, the cancer.
I just read some article recently that there was AIDS, well, the fact that the words were put together, AIDS-related cancer or cancer-related AIDS, somehow they were mixed together or
well,
causing.
if they had been talking about Kaposi's sarcoma, we've been talking about Kaposi's sarcoma since the very beginning. So I would assume that...
this person died in the 80s?
Okay, then it's probably...
AIDS-related cancer?
Yeah, it's probably Kaposi's sarcoma.
Or 90s.
Yeah, it's probably Kaposi's sarcoma. Yeah, this type of sarcoma is forms a tumor, and it just expands and expands. You can't
And that's
stop.
from having AIDS.
Yeah, because normally this type of sarcoma we don't see at all. I mean, if I had it right now, if I had Kaposi's sarcoma, my immune system is strong enough that it'll just kill it. It'll just get rid of it. But if I were immunocompromised, then I might develop Kaposi's sarcoma. The we only see this in cases where you have almost no immune system at all, where your immunity is completely gone. Remember I told you the story about the little girl that had the yeast infection in her stool. Did I tell you that story? Okay. The reason that she had yeast in her stool was because all the bacteria were dead. And normally the bacteria kill off all the yeast, or they keep it in check. All the good bacteria keep the yeast in check. They had never seen a case where all the normal flora, all the bacteria in this digestive tract was gone. They'd never seen that before. And because of that, the yeast, which isn't a bacteria, wasn't killed by the antibiotic. The yeast just exploded and just went insane. And that's what was killing it. It's the same way with this, with Kaposi's sarcoma. The only time we see it is in bubble boys, the individuals with no immune system whatsoever. Those are the only individuals that we were seeing Kaposi's sarcoma, or somebody just before they died, whose immune system was breaking down. Those people we saw. But then all of a sudden we saw it with people with AIDS. And we had half the medical community had never seen it before. I mean, how many people have bubble boys that they're treating, or geriatrics that are dying from because their immune system is breaking? I mean, this is a rarity. They had to go to their medical journals just to find this stuff because nobody else knew about it. It's only the individuals that were dealing with these specific populations that had never seen this stuff. And then all of a sudden we realized it was the same thing. And this is a problem in medicine as well. Doctors don't want to see something new. They don't recognize it as something new. They try to rationalize it as something else. This is something else that has mutated to this form. They don't want to see something new. They want to call the measles every time they see it. They don't want to call it anything brand new. They don't want to be the ones, because they can't. They follow protocols every time. And the protocols tell them, this is multiple sclerosis. This is not anything else. And so they will identify it as multiple sclerosis until somebody else goes, hey, you know, somebody else looks at the same patient and says, this is a multiple sclerosis because they don't have this problem. And that's the problem part of the problems in the medical community. They just kind of, they're like sheep. They just follow each other. Or like cattle, everybody's on the same trail. Nobody's just wandering around wherever they want to go. Doctors want to think in the same way. Because they don't want to get in trouble. They don't want to get sued. I'm sorry, I'm painting a really ugly picture of doctors. But they're really smart people, but they all want to say the same thing. They don't want to make any mistakes. The epidemiologists were able to determine the disease was being spread through sharing needles among the intravenous drug users and unprotected anal sex among gay males. I know. And if you know anything about the bathhouses, and probably you don't, but if you know anything about the bathhouses, these individuals were having sex half a dozen to a dozen times a night if they were at the bathhouse, which is fairly, just think about it. So potentially there was ripping and tearing taking place. In order for the HIV virus to, in order for the HIV virus to be spread, blood has to be involved. Blood has to be involved. There has to be an open wound someplace. So, and they determined that it was the anal sex because the mucous membrane of the rectum is fairly delicate, relatively delicate. So that type of intercourse would cause some degree of ripping and tearing. Ripping sounds horrible, doesn't it? There would be some break in the mucous membrane, and therefore that's how the disease would enter the person's body. Prospective studies. A prospective study is a forward-looking longitudinal study that follows a healthy group of subjects over time and projects how variables will change. For example, of a prospective test was one conducted in San Francisco looking at breast cancer rates and drinking alcohol. So what does alcohol have to do with breast cancer? Well, now we know that the two have something to do with one another. They did this prospective study. They looked at over 70,000 women. And they looked at them over a 20-year period. They followed the ones who drank, who only drank one drink a day, increased their likelihood. Drinking only one drink a day increased their likelihood of developing breast cancer by 1.08. So what does alcohol have to do with breast cancer? Does alcohol go right into your breasts? No, it doesn't. But it also depletes your immune system, potentially, to some extent. Women who drank 2 drinks a day increased their likelihood of developing cancer by 1.21. Women who drank 3 drinks a day increased their likelihood of developing cancer by 1.3. This is what they discovered. 70,000 women in San Francisco. So what do you think? Is this an accurate study or not? The more you drink, the more likely you'll get breast cancer. They proved it in San Francisco over a 20-year period with 70,000 women. Is that enough women? Was it a representative enough group in San Francisco? Were there enough African Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans, American Indians potentially, European Americans, of course, since the vast majority of people in the United States, about 70% are European American. Is this an accurate study? Is 70,000 enough for you guys? Does that make you happy? Would you have been happier with 700,000? Well, there's not even that many people in San Francisco. Is that okay? probably it's pretty accurate. 70,000 is a lot of people. And we're probably talking about a fairly diverse population. There are American Indians living in California. There are more reservations in California than any other state. I know, how strange is that? It's a big state. They're not very big reservations. In a natural experiment, an experimenter tries to study an independent variable under natural conditions. A researcher has a group of women keep diaries. One group frequents bars and binge drinks while the other group frequents the same bars but doesn't consume alcohol. They are looking to see which group is sexually assaulted more frequently. This was an actual study that was done. They were looking at women who frequent bars, and they were trying to determine if alcohol was a factor in sexual assault. We're not grading them. Oh, she's a 9, dude. They weren't really grading the women, but they were just taking two different groups of women. One group that consumed almost no alcohol, and the other group that were binge drinkers, to see which one of them were more likely to become sexually assaulted. What kind of an answer do you think? What answer did they get? Going to the bar, is that the factor that leads to sexual assault? Or is it the amount of alcohol you drink? What do you think the result is? It had to do with the amount of alcohol. They've done other studies where they determined that when a male sees a female drinking alcohol, it makes him angry. He gets angrier. He's rougher with her. The more alcohol you drink, the rougher he becomes. So the more likely that he will sexually assault her. As strange as that sounds. So it doesn't have to do with where they are. It has to do with how much alcohol they're consuming. This is a hint and a warning to women. Don't go to the bars and consume a lot of alcohol. You're more likely to be sexually assaulted. And they found this out looking at their diaries. Randomized clinical trials test one or more independent variables on groups or individuals. The most common randomized clinical trials establishes a baseline with a group and then measures the level of change at different levels of independent variables. This is usually a within subjects design. Between groups design measures differences between multiple groups. In community field trials, the groups are entire communities that are measured against one another. The Crest toothpaste trials in the 1950s were this type of a trial. And I was actually in that trial. And my town got the same green, ugly toothpaste with no fluoride in it. So the people that come from my hometown have really crappy teeth. And one of the reasons is because when they did the Crest trials, we were the ones that got the bad toothpaste. And there was more sugar in it than there was anything else. So we didn't get the good stuff. We got the bad stuff. Damn it. And the town right next door, those people have much nicer teeth than the people from my home. This is a tragedy. This makes you want to just spit, doesn't it? The people from the next town over have much nicer teeth than the people from my hometown, which is kind of irritating if you think about it. We used to get it at school. They used to give us free toothpaste at school. They also used to give us free milk, which was kind of interesting. But our group didn't have the Crest in it. It wasn't Crest. Why don't we stop right here? We'll pick this up next time. See you next week. I will rearrange the tables so